Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for coming to tonight's Don Edwards Lecture. My name is James Brent. I'm a professor of political science, and I really want to welcome all of you. And I'm looking forward to this evening. After a very long and hard-fought presidential election season, I think tonight is going to be very inspiring. The Don Edwards Lecture was established more than 15 years ago by friends of longtime member of Congress from the Bay Area, Don Edwards. Don Edwards was, it's not an exaggeration to call him a legend. He was often referred to as the congressman from the Constitution for his commitment to the values contained in the Constitution. He was also committed to the environment. We have a Don Edwards wildlife preserve just north of San Jose. And we have had this lecture series for 15 years with a series of speakers who embody the values that Don Edwards fought for his entire life. And Don Edwards, by the way, just passed away 1 year ago. And one of my colleagues, Steve Van Beek, he's no longer with us, but he was in the department when we started the Don Edwards Lecture, and when I posted this to Facebook, he said, wow, what a great choice. Don Edwards absolutely would have loved the fact that Judge Thelton Henderson is the speaker tonight. Judge Henderson, it is not an exaggeration to say, is a legend in the field of civil rights. He graduated locally from law school at UC Berkeley. I know many of my students hope someday to do the same. And afterwards, he became the very first African-American lawyer in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And he went down to the South during the 1960s to make sure that they were enforcing federal civil rights legislation, and in doing so, he worked with some of the great civil rights leaders of the day. He was appointed as a federal judge by President Jimmy Carter in 1980, where he served ever since, overseeing several landmark cases. And his commitment to social justice is evidenced by the fact that there's a center named for him for social justice at Bolt Hall in Berkeley. We're also very pleased to have with us tonight Judge LaDoris Cordell, who will be engaging Judge Henderson in conversation. Judge Cordell is a local fixture. She has been a civil rights attorney, a California municipal and Superior Court judge, vice provost of Stanford University, a member of the Palo Alto City Council, and on and on and on. And we thank both of you very much for being here tonight. I'd also like to thank the Department of Political Science, the Departments of History, Pi Sigma Alpha, the Political Science Honor Society, and our individual sponsors. We've been fortunate enough to receive generous sponsorship from our alums, from local community organizations to bring this event to you this evening. And of course, I'd also really like to thank the Department of Political Science staff, Trinae Bill, Shannon Gallagher, and Kristen Costanza for all the work they've done tonight. What we're going to be doing is for about 40 minutes, Judge Cordell will engage Judge Henderson in a conversation. And while that's occurring, I will pass out some white cards. If you'd like a white card and you'd like an opportunity to ask Judge Henderson a question, just raise your hand. I'll give one to you. I will collect it, and then I will go ahead and give it to Judge Cordell. So all you got to do is raise your hand for that. And at this point, I would simply ask that you check your cell phones to make sure your cell phones are turned down. And we're planning to wrap it up about 8:15 is about when we're shooting for. So with all of that, if you'll join me in giving a very warm welcome to Judge LaDoris Cordell and Judge Thelton Henderson.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here this evening. You know, Judge Thelton Henderson has been interviewed 1 million times. Okay, not 1 million, maybe 5,000, whatever. And so when I was asked to talk with him this evening, I thought, what am I going to do that could be something different, because he's just been interviewed all over the place. And then it hit me. Judge Henderson is a terrific storyteller, and he has some terrific stories to tell. So we're going to go through, in the time that we have, Judge Henderson's life. You're going to get to know who this man is, what he has done, and we're going to do it with cue cards. So if you all could direct your attention to the screen, and I asked Judge Henderson to do this. He has no idea what's happening tonight, by the way. I have not spoken at all to him since being asked to interview. So, some of you may have heard, of a certain age, there was a TV show, and actually it was a precursor to all the reality shows, Queen for a Day. Anybody in the audience remember Queen for a Day? Yeah, okay. So it was a TV show, one of the most popular daytime TV shows from 1956 to 1964. Does anybody remember the name of the host? His name was Jack Bailey. So on Queen for a Day, for those who don't know about it, usually it's 3 women would be on the show, and they were each asked to tell their story. And the one who had the most pathetic story won. And so pathetic meaning, my husband left me, and then the house burned down, and then and it just on and on and on. So there was an audience meter. And every time at the very end, Mr. Bailey would then go to each person and put his hand over their head, and the audience, students would clap for the most pitiful story. And the one who got the biggest applause on the applause meter was Queen for a Day. And then this woman would then be put on a throne, given a crown, cape, and then she was given, really special prizes. So a typical one was a washing machine, seriously, or an iron, right? So what we're going to do today is, it's a sense of, Judge Henderson, you're our queen for a day. It's not because you have any pathetic stories, you have exciting stories to tell, but it kind of reminded us of that. So you're not going to so the washing machine, the iron, they'll be delivered to your house next week, all right? So, but what you will get tonight.
I'm hoping for a Mercedes.
No, that's not Queen for a Day. What you will get today is a lot of love, and a lot of love from this audience. So speaking of love, let us start with this woman. Who is that?
Oh my gosh.
Who is that?
My first love. That's my mother.
All right, tell us about her. Tell us her name and tell us about her.
That's my mom. That's Wanzi Henderson. And she is in front of the little house we lived in. Boy, where'd you get this? In Louisiana. I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1931. And that's my mom. Shortly after I was born, standing outside. That's little Thelton Henderson.
And you're about, how old were you think you were in that
Oh gosh, I
Maybe
don't know. I
3
know
or 4,
there's
something
a
like that?
bigger picture. I'm standing on a couch looking at my Aunt Rebecca. Wasn't a professional photographer, but she took that picture. And that's my grandmother, Mama Estelle. Estelle was her name. I grew up in a matriarchal family. My grandfather, her husband, was a minister. And when we came out to California, Mom, as I called her, had 9 kids. And
This is the grandmother.
My grandmother. And we came out to California when I was 3 years old from Louisiana. If any of you saw The Grapes of Wrath, how the Joad family came out to California in an old truck with a couple of cars trailing. We did that, the 9 kids. And me, I was the only kid at that time. I was the oldest.
Really?
My mother was the first to have a baby, so it was the 9 kids, my grandmother, and me, and a friend who owned the truck that drove us out here.
And were you an only child?
I was an only child and considered spoiled rotten, as a lot of my relatives used to say.
Absolutely, should be. And who's that? Is this your mom again?
That's my mom. My gosh. That's my mom and me. That's after my mom moved up to Berkeley. She lived I grew up in Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles. And I'll tell a little story about how she got up to Berkeley. She stayed in the house I grew up in for many years. And as my grandmother started ailing, she lived to be 99. We were hoping she would hang in there until 100. She didn't quite make it. But my mother moved out of the house, or left her house on 43rd Street to stay with my grandmother in her last days. And the neighborhood was getting pretty rough from when I grew up in it. And gangs were starting to form. The Crips were in the area, and the Bloods. And one night, while she was at my grandmother's, a couple of bullets were fired through the bedroom window that landed in my mother's head post. And I can't say that she would have been hit by the bullet, but it certainly hit her bed. And I figured that was time to get her out of there. We sold that house, and I brought her up to Berkeley, where I bought her a house, and my other Aunt Gay, they lived together. So this is my mother in that period. I did a wedding for one of the neighbors, and we were at the wedding party, and that's a picture of me and my mother sitting there after the wedding that I performed.
So you went to public school in L.A.?
In L.A.,
All right,
yeah.
so you end up going to high school.
Right.
And this whole Clark Gable look. It's like, that's like the Gone with the Wind look thing. Clark, is this?
Wait a
No. Let's Judge Henderson.
My wife
Judge Henderson.
is
Focus here.
a
Focus here.
mole.
Focus here. So you went to high school.
I went to
public
high
high
school.
school. Do you remember the name of your high school?
Jefferson High.
All
I
right.
went to Thomas Jefferson, the Jefferson Democrats.
And then, so was this like Johnny Unitas kind of?
That's me, number 7.
High school, right?
High school, yeah, playing. I played halfback.
Halfback.
Yeah.
Right. So you go to high school and then off to college.
Off to college.
Right. And
yeah.
you went up to Berkeley?
I went up to Berkeley. I got a football scholarship to Berkeley.
Wow. And is that the Berkeley look now? Is
That's
that
the, yeah, the mustache is gone.
Mustache went.
And yeah, that's the Berkeley look.
So I'm assuming in college, just like students here, you studied all the time, you didn't hang around, and you were very focused on your studies.
I did.
Yes.
But, that's a picture of me. My friends there was a track star, Lehman King, who at that time was the fastest man in the world. He held the world's record in the 100-yard dash. And he was very good, and the school, under the table gave him that Buick. And
Are you
I
serious?
was standing there, saying, hey, look at my Buick. That's sort of what that picture is.
So here you are, you were number 42? Is that
42,
you up on the corner there?
which was Jackie Robinson's
That's
number. I
right,
wanted
yes.
Jackie Robinson's number because he was my hero.
Wow. At what position? Again, halfback at
I
Berkeley?
played halfback, yeah.
Berkeley? And of course you studied all the time.
I
No
did,
hanging
most
around.
of the time.
Most of the time you're hanging out there. And then also you played not just football, right?
Baseball. I got hurt in football in my sophomore year and couldn't play anymore, but I was actually a better baseball player than I was a football player, but I got the football scholarship. So I went to play baseball the rest of my time.
And what
at Cal.
position did you play?
I was a shortstop in high school, but the captain of the team was a shortstop, so I played outfield.
Is that right?
And that's me and Donnie Walker, my best friend. These were old days, and I was the first black to play on the UC Berkeley baseball team.
Seriously,
and so
this is March 2nd, 1955.
1955.
And you were it.
I was it. And they had questions. I didn't know this until years later. Donnie and I bumped into each other. We were roommates, and he stepped up. The coach said, is there anybody who's willing to be roommates with Thelton? I didn't know that then, but Donnie was my roommate and my best friend on the baseball team.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you finish college,
I finished
right?
Cal.
And then you decided to go to the Army?
I didn't decide. I
How
got
did it
drafted.
happen? Talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Okay. I got hurt in football, and they had the ROTC. I don't know if they still have ROTC, Reserve
some
Officers
universities do.
Training Corps. Everybody was in that, and you did it for 2 years, mandatory. And
All
if you wanted,
males.
all males,
females,
all
right.
male, no female. And if you wanted to really go into the Army, you'd go 4 years, and then you'd join the Army as a lieutenant. But I went in, I got hurt, and I quit ROTC because I was in 4F, which meant ineligible for the military. And I was
Because of your injury?
Because of my injury. I had a bad knee. So I went through school playing baseball, and the draft board, they had draft boards in areas around the city, was right across the street from the baseball stadium. And some of the draft people would come watch us play baseball. I didn't know that.
Oh, dear.
And so when they called me when I graduated, I was 4F. I went down to LA. I graduated in January because I lost a semester because of my knee injury, and was waiting to go to law school in September. And I got drafted. And so I came back up to Berkeley and affected this sort of limp, my bad knee, when I was running and I played baseball. And I went down to the draft board, and they let me know right away that they had admired my baseball playing, and there was nothing wrong with my knee. And so I got drafted.
So you're in the Army, and you get discharged. It says June 30th, 1962. So you were in the Army for how long?
2 years.
2 years.
I was in the Army for
And where were you stationed?
I went through, processed at Fort Ord, down around Monterey. Then I did basic training at Fort Lewis, Washington. And then I went to, when I went down to LA, I got a job as a social worker. And the military has something called an MOS, a military occupational serial number, for every job in the Army. So my MOS as a social worker was 906.5. So I went in and sent me to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, waiting to go to social work school. And 2 weeks later, I was the only one in the barracks. All the new recruits had gone to their schools, and there were 4 of us. And one day the sergeant came around and said, Henderson and Jones, or whatever they were, where have you guys been? We said, here. We didn't know what to do. We were going to bed and hanging around. And it turned out that the reason we hadn't gone to school was that they no longer had a social work school. So my MOS was 0.5, and they could have gone to 0.4 or 0.6. And they went to 0.6, which was a clinical psychologist. So I became a clinical psychologist in the Army. And spent the rest of the time at Fort Carson, Colorado.
Wow. So you get discharged, and then you're back in school.
No, I got discharged, and I decided I needed some money.
That would help.
I was out of money, broke. You don't make much in the Army. And so I worked a year at Santa Monica at System Development Corporation. And then I went to law school.
Got it. So this photo shows a whole lot of black folks hanging out. And
so
does that mean your law school class was full of all these black folks?
No, this was undergrad.
This is undergrad.
This is undergrad, and that's right outside the library. And that is virtually every black at the University of California. That's about 1952 or 3. And we call that, we say, are you going to hang out at the Inkwell today? Which is what we called our hangout there, where all the blacks hung out.
Wow. So you end up going to law school.
I ended up going to law school.
And you met some folks, these 2 people.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
So who are they?
Those are my 2 best friends. On the right is Troy Duster, a distinguished professor of sociology at Cal. He was head of the sociology department for a number of years, and a very distinguished, well-published sociologist. On the left is Russ Ellis, who was also a professor of sociology, but he had a joint appointment with sociology and architecture. It was the first such appointment where he brought the sociology of architecture, where architects would learn how to make buildings livable and that kind of thing. And Russ, they're both retired now. Russ eventually became vice provost of the university for undergraduate affairs, and he retired from there.
Wow. So you go to law school, you have best friends, you graduate, and then you have to have a job. So you end up the Department of Justice. How did that happen? And I'm going to show you this next one. So there's you standing kind of in the corner. I don't know if you can see with the glasses there.
Okay, no, that is,
Is that not you?
yeah,
Maybe it's
no,
not
that
you.
is,
It's part of the Justice Department.
no, that's not the Justice Department.
Let's skip that one.
Actually,
How's
yeah.
this? So that's you at the
That's
Justice
me at
Department.
the Justice
All right, so
Department.
tell us how that happened.
Well, it was quite by accident. I was in law school and ready to graduate, and in those days, again, this was quite a while ago, the big law firms didn't interview blacks, so I didn't know what my job was going to be. And by the way, they didn't interview women either.
So let's hold up a minute. Hold up. So you go to law school,
Mm-hmm.
just like everybody else.
It's like everybody
Get that law
else.
degree like everybody else.
Everybody.
And you're telling me that the law firms did not interview black law students or female law students?
That's correct. And one of the female law schools, who's now one of my very best friends, works across the street from me in the state building, is Kay Werdiger, who is now on the California Supreme Court. She couldn't get an interview.
Okay.
So we became buddies in that kind of a situation. But anyway, my plan was to do what all the blacks did in those days. You find a successful black lawyer and you work a deal with him. If he has space in his office, you would work a deal. You would get that space. He'd give you a few of his lesser law cases, sometimes called dogs, and you'd build up your own practice and go your own way. That's what I was planning to do. That was my career plan, and I wasn't sure if I was going to go to Los Angeles to do that or stay in Berkeley or stay in the Bay Area. When one day I got a note from the dean of the law school, Dean Prosser, asking me to come see him, and I thought, oh boy, what have I done, or what's going on? That was unusual. Well, it turned out that the Kennedys had just come into office recently, and they had a fellow who became my mentor over these years until he passed away 2 years ago, John Doerr, who was famous. He was going around on behalf of Bobby Kennedy to government offices saying, how many blacks do you have working for you? Trying to integrate and diversify the federal government on behalf of the Kennedys. And one day, one of the people said, how many blacks do you have working for you, Mr. Doerr? And he had never thought about it. No, there had never been a black working in the Civil Rights Division, which was his department. So my great luck, my great fortune was that he was a Bolt Hall alumnus. So he called his alma mater and asked Dean Prosser, were there any blacks graduating that year? And there were 2 of us. It was the first class in Bolt Hall's history that had 2 blacks graduating. I was lucky. My grades were a little better than the other guys, and he recommended me. I flew to Washington, interviewed, and got the job.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up in that wonderful, life-changing job.
So you were with the Justice Department, total how many years?
How
many years?
About 2 years.
All right, because something happened, right?
Something happened indeed.
Didn't you get fired, man?
I got fired.
Yeah.
It took
So tell us about that.
me 15 years to even say the word, I got fired.
Yeah,
But yeah, I got fired.
So what happened?
Being the first black, they very quickly found out that I had special value for the department because the civil rights movement was going full force then. Martin Luther King was starting his great movements in Birmingham and Selma and other places. And so I very quickly was kept at the scene of the action instead of working out of Washington and going out periodically to investigate cases. I stayed in the field just about 80% of the time, following the movement and being a liaison with Dr. King and the other civil rights movement. So in that capacity, one night I had been working out in the field during the day, and there was only one place.
And where were you now? What state were
This
you?
is in Birmingham, in Alabama.
Birmingham. Right?
Birmingham, they
Yeah.
called it. And I'd been working out in the field, and there was only one place that blacks could stay in Birmingham. That was the A.G. Gaston Motel. And Dr. King stayed there, and I stayed there. And I was coming in just as it was getting dark. Dr. King was driving out of the motel, and I was driving in, and we stopped and talked out of the window of the car. He said he was going to Selma. And for those of you who saw the movie Selma, they had the church scenes there. That was when King was going to Selma to get Selma ready for the big demonstrations and the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But anyway, we talked a bit, and he was ready to go, and then he said, "You know, Thelton, Reverend Smith has a bad tire on his car, and we're a little worried about it. Are you going out again tonight?" I said, "Nope, I'm checking in. I'm going to go eat, and I'm checking into my room." And he said, "Can we use your car?" And I said, "Of course." And I didn't give a thought to it. My clerk was sitting in the front row on the way here. He was asking me about this, and he said, "Do I regret it?" And I do not, although I regretted getting fired. But it was about a 78-mile drive from Birmingham to Selma in a night on a very wicked area, a rural area where King, if he got a flat tire there and the wrong people came upon him, he'd be dead. And so I didn't even hesitate. I said, "Yes, you can use the car." So I drove in, they drove back, got in the car, and drove away. We were naive back then. This was 1962. The FBI was following King and bugging him, and George Wallace's state agents were following him. And as they followed him, they took the license number and they struck gold because this was a car rented by a government attorney. And I like to say that I've been a federal judge now for 36 and a half years, almost 37, but I have never reached a higher status than I did the day after this car was loaned, because in the Southern papers, I was described as a high-ranking government official and an intimate friend of John F. Kennedy's. So,
Wow.
And it became a big political problem for the Kennedys, and I was fired.
So
See,
you
I
had
can
to,
say
you
it
had
now.
to go.
I
You
had to go, yeah.
So you leave the Justice Department and you have to get a job, right? So you go practice law, is that right?
Right.
And so most people don't know this, you were Johnny Cochran before Johnny Cochran was Johnny Cochran, right?
That's right.
So where did you practice?
I practiced. I came back to California,
Right.
and I really started over. I came back disgraced. I'd been fired in my first job out of law school.
By the way, let me interrupt a second. Your mother was alive then?
Yes, my mother was alive.
How'd she feel about you getting kicked out of the Justice Department?
I think she had a defense mechanism. We never talked about
Is
it,
that
and I
right?
don't even know if she knew I was fired.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Got
I
it.
think
Okay.
we never talked about it.
So
but-
you're back.
I'm back, but I visit my mother and I stay with her until I sort of get my bearing. But then by that time, I really liked the Bay Area more than I liked LA. LA had changed. It wasn't the LA I left. So I came back to Berkeley, and I really started from square one. I got a room for $28 a month that I had stayed in when I was an undergraduate. And I started over, and I lived there, and I was going to try to write a book about my experiences. And I'd go to the library at Bolt Hall each day, and I was running out of money, and a guy that was a year ahead of me, Don Warden was his name, very bright guy, had started a law practice. And he had a radio program, and back then, lawyers couldn't advertise. but a
right.
radio program is a wonderful way
That's
to
right.
advertise. And he had a booming
This
business.
was in Oakland? Was it?
This was in Oakland. And so the way I kept going, Don, we had too much of a caseload, and he'd say, hey, Thelton, can you go out to Richmond for me and make an appearance, you know, cop a plea or do an arraignment for me or do this or that? And I'd do it, and he'd give me $50, $75 or whatever it was way back then.
Paid the rent.
Pay the rent. And that's why I did that for a long time while
Right.
I was trying to write the book. But the
Right.
book wasn't coming. And I can write a pretty good brief, but I can't write books.
Wow.
And it wasn't coming.
Wow.
And so what I did was join Don in his law firm. And Don, being the kind of high-profile guy with no ego, we started a firm with another friend of ours who had gone to Hastings. So the firm was Henderson, Holloman, and Warden. The guy that had the firm was last.
Got it.
And we had a thriving business.
So while you were practicing law, you were also coming to the attention of some very interesting people. So, Jet magazine. So this is August 6, 1964. For those not familiar with Jet, it's the magazine of black folks. And Jet, I don't know if Jet's even still around anymore, but
I think it is.
But Jet magazine, you can see it was 20 cents for Jet magazine. And then in this particular issue, you got play right there. Thelton Henderson ousted, but still gets going, after lending a U.S. leased car to M.L. King Jr.'s aides in Birmingham last year, is now settled in a prestige job with an Oakland top-notch law firm. So that's the firm you were talking about,
That's
right?
the firm.
But you know, you didn't stop there, because Jet's fine, but when you step up and make Ebony, Ebony is like, that's it. So this is Ebony magazine, and this is
when you get
this is 1965. Now this edition, if you look up in the left-hand corner, it says eligible bachelors, 1965, public service for single girls. And so, and if you open that edition, who do you see? You see one of Ebony's top eligible bachelors, 1965. Thelton, I have to do this now. It says here in the caption, lawyer Thelton E. Henderson, 31, is partner in Oakland, California firm of Fitzsimmons and Petrus. It's another firm.
Right.
His ideal woman, no, I gotta go here, is feminine, demure, and quietly aggressive. Lord have mercy. Thelton, please explain yourself and then apologize. Thelton.
Nancy, bring my wheelchair. I've got to get out of here. I don't know where that came from, but
Take the fifth, Thelton, take the fifth.
I will.
And so, and you were, this photo was you playing golf. Now, were you a golfer at the time?
I was not a golfer. What happened, they told
Look
me
at all
I
this.
was an eligible bachelor from the people at Ebony, and that they were going to send a photographer out for a photo shoot. And I had, at that time, I had an old Volkswagen Bug that I'd had since law school that was really beat up. And so, you know, they said, we'd like to take you in a picture in your car or something like
that wasn't
that. And
gonna
I
work.
said, you don't want a picture of my car. The seats, springs are coming out of the seat. And so I thought around, and there's a park near Lake Merritt in Oakland. And I thought, and I don't play golf, but one of the partners there played golf. So I said, well, I'll be a golfer. And so the photographer came, we talked about where we would shoot pictures. We went to this course, and I pretended to be a golfer. So that's
There it is.
that's
All right, there's all the proofs there. So in addition to Jet Magazine, Ebony, Eligible Bachelor, you're still in touch with the folks in DC, because you got a very interesting letter. And this is dated August 16th, 1967. Dear Thelton, I'd be interested in any comments you might have on the 2 urban development bills I've enclosed, and also on the speech which I delivered August 4th in San Francisco. By the way, how are things going for you out there? I haven't heard from you in quite a while. With best personal regards, Robert F. Kennedy.
Yeah, I was in touch with the gang at the office and with Bobby Kennedy.
Even after you left?
Even after I left, yeah. There were, they regretted that I left, but it was a political thing that had to be done, but there were no bad feelings
from
their part or my part. I understood it all.
And did you write back to Bobby Kennedy?
I wrote back to Bobby, and I was just starting to practice, and shortly after that letter, he was running for president himself, and I got a letter that he was meeting at the Fairmont Hotel, one of the big hotels in San Francisco, and invited me. And I started learning how these things work. I went and figured, hey, I'm hobnobbing with, you know, really the big shots, the Kennedys. And it was one of the longest meetings I've ever gone to, because he got up there and talked about running and said, and I've invited you people here, you're special, and so we're having this big fundraiser, and so we want you to buy some tables. And I forget what the price was, but today's price would
more than
be
what
like,
you had.
More than I, much more than I had, but it would be these days probably a table of 10 at $1,000 per table.
Per seat.
And per seat.
Yeah,
And so
$10,000.
$10,000 per table. And the people were there, and they were going, I'll take 3. And it started going around. I said, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I couldn't sneak out of the room. So finally, it came to me, and I said, I'll take 1. And then I went around and scuffled up
money.
some people who could afford that.
Fantastic. Wow.
So I learned not to accept those kinds of invitations.
Well, what's ahead, right?
Yeah.
So at some point, shortly thereafter, you decide, you move down the peninsula, and you decide to take up this whole spirit of legal aid, right?
Yeah.
And so where and what?
Well, well, there was a little hitch in there. I was decided I wanted something else. I wasn't sure that what I was doing was my future, and so I got a call, and I don't want to talk too long, but I got a call from a reporter from the New York Times, Paul Fleming, whom I'd gotten to know when I was in the South. He covered the civil rights movement for the Times, and we became good friends. And in part because I really liked him, I liked his values, I liked the way he covered the movement, and he was really pro-civil rights movement. So from time to time, I would give him a little tip. I'd say, you know, you ought to be up on such and such a place at 1 o'clock, because something was going to happen there that I knew. So years later, I'm practicing, and I get a call from him, and he's now the head of recruitment for the Peace Corps, which has just started, for Sergeant Shriver's Peace Corps. And he says, you ever thought about joining the Peace Corps? And I said, no, but it sounds interesting. Flew me to Washington, and I took the language aptitude test and passed it, and in the 2 days I was there, by the time I came back, they offered me a job running the Peace Corps in the Cameroons. So I said, let me think about it. Came back, thought about it, and accepted. Turned in my resignation at Fitzsimmons and Petrus, and got ready to go to the Cameroons. I waited for about 3 weeks, and I didn't hear anything.
And you have no job. You turned in.
I had no job, so I'm waiting. And finally, I called Fleming and said, what's going on? He said, I thought you were in the Cameroons. Let me check. And he called and found out that being fired from the Justice Department, this was also a federal job, they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know if they could hire me again. So they said they would work it out. He went to some higher people. They said they would work it out, but after a while I got tired of waiting, and I took the job with legal aid.
So this is legal aid in East Palo Alto.
This is legal aid in East Palo Alto. It was the first legal aid office, first office of any kind, legal office to ever exist in Palo Alto. And
East Palo Alto.
East Palo Alto, I mean. And then some years later, as you know, you came along and set up an office there.
Private
But
practice,
this was the first
Wow.
legal office in East Palo Alto.
So while you were there doing legal aid work, then you end up shifting over and ending up at Stanford,
I did.
right?
That was quite by accident. I had a lot of Stanford students working for me at the legal aid office, and we became good friends. And one day they were talking, and they said words to the effect, you know, Sally Ann Payton is graduating this year. This was 1968. And she'll be the first black in the history of Stanford's law school to graduate. And although Bolt Hall, my alma mater, was no you know, place that poured out blacks, we certainly did better than that. We had a number of blacks, and I couldn't understand that. And at that stage in my life, I was the kind of guy that would go over to Stanford and say, what's going on? And I did that, and Dean Manning essentially said, well, you know, we don't discriminate, Thelton. We'll take any black with a 3.7 GPA and a 97 percentile LSAT score. And I had thought about these things and the strategy of these things from my voting rights days with the Justice Department. And I knew how those things work, and so I talked to him about it. I said, you know, I take it you want someone, you're worried that these people can't survive, you can't live with it? That's right. And I said, well, let me look at your last year's class. And I knew that Stanford has legacy students who didn't have 3.7s and 90. So I looked at it and I said, okay, everyone on here you've told me you can live with. And so I found the 5 lowest ranked admittees, and I said, you ought to, if you really want to integrate and diversify, you ought to have minority students who at least meet these standards, because you can live with them, you've already, and they agreed to that. Then they offered me a job. They wanted me to run the program.
That's right, and you did. I'm going to move along a little bit here.
Yeah,
and so you end up at Stanford.
I end up at Stanford.
And this was from the Real News. This was a newspaper that they had, and there you are in the corner featuring some of the folks who worked there. And while you were there, then they went through the whole dashiki period there.
I had my dashiki.
You had your dashiki, because that's the thing that you had to have.
Right, I had to have a dashiki
Yes,
back then.
and you were the assistant dean, so you admitted, part of your job was to admit students, and some of whom looked like that, which was me, yours truly.
You had the biggest afro I had ever seen up to that time.
But indeed, it was because of you, when I applied, it was really you who said, pushed them to say, bring her in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, thank you.
No, it was easy. That was no favor. I got the best people I could get, and you were there.
Word, okay. You're at Stanford for a bit, and then at some point you go back to private practice, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
And you go back to private practice.
Right.
And this time you're with Remcho, Rosen, is it Henderson? Is it 3 of you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rosen, Remcho, and Henderson.
Right. And you focused on what kind of litigation?
Civil rights
Civil
litigation.
Rights? Right.
We aspired to be a civil rights firm, but not going for the money. We wanted to make more money than I made as assistant dean at Stanford, and that Joe made at the ACLU, and that Sandy made at Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, but we didn't want to get rich. We wanted to do good things, make a comfortable living, and change the world.
And that you did, and you did that for a while, and then there was something else, though. You ended up eventually here. in front of Judge Peckham, who
right.
swore you in
Right,
as a federal judge.
as a federal judge.
Okay, and what year was that?
That was 1980, June of 1980.
And it didn't just happen overnight, right? This was a
No.
process.
Oh, it was a long, torturous process.
But it's one in which you're getting the boot at the Justice Department was not an impediment, apparently, right?
It almost was. I mean, it surfaced, but
Right.
it wasn't an impediment. Senator Alan Cranston, who's
Right.
now passed, appointed me, and you were involved in this because you were sort of my field manager along with Collis Conway Collis.
That's
I always
right.
got his
That's
name
all right.
backwards. And he worked for Senator Cranston. Luck played a role in a lot of my life. I should let everyone know.
Before you go further, just so folks know, for federal judgeship, you're nominated by your senator, and then the state
US
senator, U.S. senator, and then that appointment you have to get confirmed by the state senate and so on. So it was
And
Cranston
you're
who.
appointed by the president.
Exactly.
You're nominated, but it's a rubber stamp if the senator is the same party as the president.
Generally, it's going to go through, and it's a lifetime appointment.
I think.
Okay.
So I heard from you that the committee had met and that they were nominating two people the next day. One was Marilyn Patel, who would be the first woman on our court, and I was the other, and I would be the second black to serve on the court. So the next day, paper came out that Marilyn Patel nominated by Senator Cranston, and I looked and said, "Where's my name?" It wasn't there. And I went to the office and got a call from Senator Cranston's office, his head of his office, and said, "The senator would like to see you at 5 o'clock this afternoon." I said, "Uh-oh, something's wrong." So it's the longest day I've ever spent trying to figure out what it is. And I did I played a lot of bridge at that time. And I remember thinking like a bridge player, what can this be? You know, if you bid 6 spades and you see the board, see what your partner has, you have to decide, uh-oh, the only way I can make 6 spades is if I play him for this and this. And I did that kind of analysis. I said, the only thing I can think of that he hasn't named me with Marilyn is the car with Martin Luther King. So I called John Doerr, who was in a deposition in Texas. And he came out of the deposition, and I told him what was going on. And John was a well-known, a famous man, and his integrity and all. And he said, "I'll call Senator Cranston." And so I took his word for it. He didn't call me back. And when I got there at 5, I sat in the chambers with Senator Cranston and his chief of staff. And I learned something that has been important to me in the years. The way he did it, he had a couch like this and a couch like this. And he sat me right in the middle of that intersection. And I realized as I was sitting there that he had placed me in a way that I couldn't see him and the other guy at the same time. And I realized that was intentional. And they were questioning me and looking at each other and asking questions. And he asked about the car, and I told him the story that I told you here. And finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he said, "Well, Mr. Henderson or Thelton, I don't remember which, you're going to be our next federal judge." And I said, "Phew."
You went, woohoo!
So, woohoo. And that was it. And I went out, and I'll never forget this. My mother was very understated. I called her on the phone. They used to have phones for you young people on corners, and I went out to the corner and put a quarter or a dime or whatever it was, and I called my mother in LA, and I said, "Mom, I just finished talking to Senator Cranston, and he's going to appoint me as a federal judge." And she said, oh, that's nice, Thelton. Did you hear about your cousin Ronnie? No. That was
There you
my
go.
mother's reaction
Wow.
to it.
Wow. So you get sworn in, and I have to tell you that, Thelton, maybe you didn't know this, but you really set the mark, because once you became a judge, then everybody else started becoming judges. Like that one, you know, and then there was that one, and then, you know, and that one.
That was
Yeah, you know, so you really got things going on the judge scene. So as a judge, you're hearing cases, but you're also doing other things, such as getting arrested in South Africa.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
Yeah,
that
so
was,
I don't know if we're going to move as quickly as you can, but could you just kind of give us a short version of the arrest?
Yeah, I was in South Africa touring the country, and I went to a hearing. They had homelands, townships in South Africa, which were really, they were supposed to be black townships, but it was really South Africa's way of presenting to the world, falsely of course, that the blacks weren't so well off. They had their own townships and all. But these were just really segregated slums that blacks live in with no power. We were visiting a trial, and one of them, and we came out, I was with Leon Higginbotham and Julius Chambers. Leon Higginbotham was a very famous federal appellate court judge.
African-American.
African-American, who was slated to be Thurgood Marshall's successor. He was always, and Julius Chambers, who was the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We came out, and the police were there, and said, we want to talk to you. So the people, the black lawyers who were escorting us around the country, drove us, followed the police car, and we went to a little brick house with no windows, and we were interrogated for quite a long time in an intimidating way, starting off and saying, what are you doing in our country? And you say, what? We are visas, we have passports, but this was a homeland. It was very strange. And so we were arrested, and I was kind of frightened about it, because when they would question us, they had this little thug-looking guy in a military uniform. When the big guy would question us, this guy would be behind us with sort of a baton, hitting his fist with it, sort of suggesting that if he didn't like our answer, he was going to whack us on the head. So it was a very intimidating thing. Finally, thinking as fast as I could, I started, I got the chance when they asked where had we been and where were we going, I lied and said, well, I lied about the timing. I said we had been with the American ambassador that morning, and he was expecting us back that evening for dinner, letting him know we would be missed. And he sent the little thug out to make some phone calls. He said, go check on it. He did something. And he came back in about 20 minutes and said, okay, you can go and have a good time in our country. And we were supposed to stay another day, and we got out of there right away and
What
moved
part of the
on.
statement you gave was a lie?
Just that we had been with them this morning.
Got it.
It was 2 days
Got it.
before, but I condensed it like this was urgent, and he's
Thank you. Wow.
will be missed was
Wow.
the message I wanted to give.
So in addition, lots of cases in the spotlight, Prop 209. So if you could maybe like 2 or 3 sentences, what was 209 about, just so folks are up to speed on that?
209 was a bill, a proposition to get rid of affirmative action. To get rid of affirmative action, and I held, based on what I still consider this day, proper Supreme Court precedent, that would be an unfair burden on blacks because of the precedent, the Washington case.
Right.
But I was eventually, I got vilified for it and got a lot of death threats, and for about a number of months, the marshal parked a couple of cars outside my house down the street because of the death threats. But anyway, that was
Wow,
probably my most
209,
notorious case.
And then you have the prison. So actually, you actually made it really big time when you're the subject of an editorial cartoon.
Right.
And it has you squaring off with Schwarzenegger, and it looks like you have a pen in your hand and he has a sword in
Yeah,
his.
sure, right.
And this is you're presiding over the case dealing with the prisons,
Right.
California. And again, just in a couple of sentences, that case is about?
That case is about medical care for prisoners. We have 34 now state prisons, and I had a suit was filed talking about inadequate care for the prisoners under the 8th Amendment. And so we had a study, and we found that on average, a prisoner in one of the 33 prisons was dying every 6 days because of inadequate medical care, and that was an atrocity. And so I took over that case, and I appointed a receiver to run the medical system, and came into confrontation with Governor Schwarzenegger, who didn't like my running the prisons and wanted to work a political deal, which I wasn't willing to do. So
Yeah, but you're still here and he isn't, so that's good.
that's right.
All right. Another thing that kept you busy was that you were a movie star. So Judge Henderson was in this movie, and it's a feature film called True Believer, and it's about a lawyer who was,
Yeah, lawyer Tony,
what's his
I'm
name?
having a
Who's
senior
the-
moment. Tony Serra.
Tony Serra.
Tony Serra, still practicing, a very, very
Right.
good lawyer
So
who
you
was
were-
representing
Right,
someone.
and
yeah.
you were actually, you're in the film. So
I'm
if
in the
people
film.
rent this movie or Netflix, True Believer, you will see Judge Henderson, right?
I like to say that my co-stars were Robert Downey Jr. and James Woods.
There you go. There you go. And you had, I'm sure you had many, many lines you had to memorize in this movie. Can you give us a flavor?
Oh yeah, I really, well, it was a challenging role for me because I had to play the role of a black judge, and it was really, I had to get into it like Marlon Brando, method acting and all. But I remember my role after the scene I was in, after the prosecutor gave her closing argument, she said, "Thank you, Your Honor." And I said, "Thank you, Miss Jessup." And then my next line was, "Mr. Bailey, may I have a word with you?"
That's
And
it?
That was it.
So being in a movie, you know, I know that when it's showed over again, you get residuals.
Yeah.
And this is actually a copy of your latest residual, and I'll give you a close-up. That was October 2016. So, yeah, with these
the money's
residuals-
still rolling in.
Yeah, you're set for life, though. You're set for life with these residuals. You also were busy as a judge swearing in new judges, like
Right.
that one. Who was that, Thelton?
Let's,
That's me.
oh, okay. I could.
No, the fro's gone.
Yeah, okay, that
Yes.
was, yeah.
Yes, that was 1982.
1982.
You swore me
I
in when I
remember
first
that
started judging,
well.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's move on because you move up. You're a judge, but now you are named at some point the chief judge.
Chief Judge.
Right?
That's right.
And there was a lot of publicity about that,
Mm-hmm.
that one there, and for a good reason. You were also the first African American
Right.
to be the chief judge to preside in all of the Ninth Circuit.
That's right.
And during that time, you were also busy because you were out meeting and greeting lots of people. That's
Yeah.
Gavin Newsom. Let me go back
Right.
and make sure we see that. And it looks like
Uh-huh.
you're getting some sort of an award there
I
with
am.
Gavin. And then you're also, you know, and maybe some people you're hanging around with, like Barack, right? And also, who's that?
That's Willie Mays.
Willie
One
Mays.
of my great baseball
Yeah,
heroes.
so he
yeah.
stopped by.
Yeah.
And you also hang out with this person.
Oh.
And this is,
Abby Ginsburg, a filmmaker,
filmmaker.
who made a documentary about me.
that's right.
Yeah.
And it's gotten all kinds of awards and all kinds of plays. So we end up, Thelton, we're going to wrap this up now with one of the, I guess the last big profile case you've handled is the PG&E case.
Right.
And when that is done, if it's done, getting close to it, your plan is to retire. Is that
My
right?
plan is to
so
retire.
that's where you're going to Just kick back, you're going to
That's
do it.
it.
So my guess is during retirement, you will do this, you'll hang out.
Yeah,
Now, who are those two?
My son and my grandson,
Son, yeah, grandson. And you will have more time to hang out with
My
this
lovely
person,
wife,
with your
yeah.
wife, Professor Alanese. And let's see, you might also have time, let's see, that's not supposed to be on there. Never mind,
It's
pay no
out, we're
attention.
out.
That's out. And you'll also have time to fish,
Fish,
like a
oh
lot of
yeah,
fishing.
pull them in.
Hang out with Missy,
Missy,
your dog
and
here
that's
that's
me
here.
and this is timely, and my Leonard Cohen hat.
There you go. And you might also just start back doing something you did back in the day, which is maybe you'll sing and
Sing.
play your guitar. It's a picture of Thelton. So in wrapping up, before we go to questions, I want to say to you, thank Thelton, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for everything you have done for so many people. And we say bravo for a job well done.
Thank you.
So we have some questions, and I'm going to, from our audience, we'll get through as many as we can. We have 10 minutes. All right, let's see what we can do. What advice do you have for young people interested in the political and justice fields that seem to lack consistency and are flooded with talent? Advice you have for young people interested in political and justice fields? Like,
I'd say get into it. You can do a lot there, and what I've found is that if you really want to do things like that, you can do it. It takes commitment, it takes follow-through, but there's much to be done. I constantly tell my law clerks to diversify, get into the field, but I'll tell you what I tell my law clerks. Most of my law clerks, I only hire, like the two sitting here, Neffy,
raise your hand so folks at least
Neffy
can
and
see
Joanna.
There we go. Yeah.
They both want to go out and save the world. I only hire clerks who have what I call a demonstrated commitment to the public justice, public service. And that means they want to go out and do good things. But most of them want to go out and be a public defender, and and I tell them that that's like being a pinch hitter, because most of the people who public defenders represent are guilty. We know that statistically, and you have a very tough job getting justice for criminal defendants. And I say, well, why don't you think about being a prosecutor? They have all the power. Why not? Wouldn't you like someone like yourself to be a prosecutor? And instead of overcharging, undercharging or fairly charging, you'll do more justice. So that's what I tell those that want to go into public service. Don't just look for one niche. Get out there and join a big law firm. Make a lot of money at the law firm, and then give it to good causes and convince your law firm to do a lot of pro bono. So I would like to see more people with the kinds of sentiments you have here, but go out and use it, not just take the easy job like the public defender or the legal aid lawyer, but get out and do it and use those talents and spread them. You'll do much more.
In your experience as a judge, how do you divide your feelings compared to what is just or even fair? I guess that means you've got to make a decision. It's a tough one. You follow the law, but maybe it's not what your heart says.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
You have to do that. You have to follow the law. That's clear. But one of the things I ask my clerks in tough cases is, how much discretion do I have? I mentioned a while back when Marilyn Patel and I were appointed the same day. She was the first woman. I was the second black. We became very fast buddies, and we were the first non-white male appointments in that court in years and years, and we had decided we're going to be, and we appeared in that court, and we thought we got a lot of bum rulings on the kind of civil rights cases we did. And we said, we're going to be the fairest, straight arrow, down the middle judges that have ever sat on this court. Well, it only took us a couple of months of doing that to realize we were being foolish. That's not the way it works. We have discretion, and it's completely legitimate to exercise your discretion. I'll say, how much discretion do I have here? Well, you've got that much discretion. We were sort of going right down the middle, giving up our values. What you do is go right up to the edge of your discretion without abusing it, and you can do a lot of good in there. And so that's what I do, and that's what judges do. It's misunderstood by the public that we're acting in an area of discretion. We're not abusing it or cheating, and that's what judges do.
Where
But
do you see
follow the law.
Where do you see the U.S. Supreme Court in the next 4 years?
I see the U.S. Supreme Court undoing many things which I value. Certainly in the area of criminal justice, I think we're going to see some bad times. I don't think we will see a lot of the institutions that the Supreme Court hasn't liked undone, but I think we will see a lot of changes in the law. We will come upon some hard times. I think my job will be harder in terms of being happy with what I'm doing. I'll have to follow some precedents that I won't like, but again, I will follow them because that's what we do.
How do you maintain, or have you maintained your passion, your motivation?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, I believe in justice and fair play. I've been involved in it all my life, and it's very easy to get involved in a case where that's involved. So that's just not a problem. It stays with me. And another thing that helps, again, I hire these wonderful clerks over the past 36 years who themselves believe in justice and fair play. And there are times when I think I get jaded, and you've probably heard me, Neffy and Joanna, where I say, oh yeah, another sentencing. And I can forget after 36 years that it's another sentencing for me. I've done hundreds of them, but it's a person's life that's involved. And I depend upon these young people to say, and I tell them, argue with me, don't go along with him. Let me know when you think I'm wrong, when I've forgotten that this is a human life that I'm about to go out there and sentence. Wow. That keeps me.
Wow. So we're going to close, and I have one last slide up here, and that is to say that this was a Cordell Alanese production, to let you know that thank you, Maria, for providing me with these wonderful photographs that I was able to put together. So thank you all, and just know you're in the presence of a legend, and if he has the time or the stamina today, it's to your benefit to come up and just shake this man's hand. He is absolutely the best. Thank you so much, Thelton.
Thank you.
So deserving.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Cordell. Thank you, Judge Henderson. What a great evening. Thank you all for attending. The judge will be here for a few minutes if you want to come up and talk with him. And thank you all. We'll see you next year.